the thing that I always ask my guests is like when everybody is first starting out in comedy, you're so desperate for anything, any stage time, that often you agree to things that you have no business agreeing to. Even nowadays, you probably more now, you would say, "There's no way I would do that." Did that happen with you at all?
Oh yeah. Yeah. When you start, you're very prone to just say yes to any gig that comes down the pike, especially anything that offers money, obviously,
Right.
in the early going. So I remember I had like this Elk Lodge gig for, it had to be like a couple of hundred cops, firemen, this kind of thing. And the whole vibe was very testosterone. And I was telling like my jokes about being a music teacher,
Right.
and I just knew from the start that I was doomed. Like they wanted either a stripper or this is exactly why they hired like a 20 something comedian to just shit on them the whole time. So yeah, that was like, I think I made like $100 or something just to kind of take a beating for 20 minutes or whatever it was. But looking back, those are the things that kind of, you're constantly being tested in comedy, especially in the early going. So it's kind of like, how bad do you want this? So that Elks gig was definitely a how bad do you want this measurement.
Yeah, it's interesting. Why do you think it is some of these sort of Elks Lodge, fire halls, VFW, these sort of more blue collar crowds, they want somebody to almost attack them? They want the comic to go on stage and make fun of the town, make fun of the place they're in. What is that? Like,
Yeah, I mean it's a type of comedy for sure. They just they want a good time. But when you're hiring a 25-year-old, 27-year-old who's only been doing comedy for 3-4 years, you get what you pay for. You're not getting like a seasoned pro, at least not in the MC spot or even the middle in a lot of cases. You're getting someone who is figuring it out. And usually they'll book like a headliner who plays a lot of these gigs and knows how to kind of save the night.
yeah.
So you're kind of chum to the sharks for the first couple of spots. But then the more you do them, you kind of figure out how to at least, at first get through it and then have some success and then stop playing those gigs.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, in those early years, I've certainly had many of those gigs. I think that's where I pretty much made most of my living for living for the first few years because they're very available, they're
Sure.
not, but you think you have this idea of what comedy is, you go up there, it may not go well. And then you see this headliner who's usually in like a sport coat and they're they were on Comic View or whatever, and they destroy because, like you said, they know how to play these crowds. And you are, the number of times I've been sitting in the back of a fire hall being like, I'm not sure I'm in the right business, like,
Yeah, and like I said, every comedian should have that thought, especially in the early going. When you're figuring out what you're doing, you're figuring out how to be consistent, what works,
yeah.
and also what works in certain gigs. Like you can't be snobby about it because those gigs, anytime you're in front of a group of people, it's a show for better or for worse. So you have to figure it out and you have to, try to make it work with who's there and with what material you have. So it's a learning curve, and those early shows are a big part of that learning curve.
Yeah. Do you have any shows to your recollection, maybe when you're touring as a headliner, you're touring with other headliners, sort of this is a big moment for you, and it just goes completely, ass backwards, where you kind of think, well, this is going to go great. How could it not go great? And, you come off stage and you're laying on the mat looking up at the ref giving you the 10 count. Like, do you have any of those in your past?
Yeah, I mean, I have all kinds of gigs that didn't go as I had hoped. Nothing really comes to mind as far as like a big one
Right.
that just bombed. I've had plenty of gigs that were just like, another gig. But I've been fortunate to play everything from Madison Square Garden to, Carnegie Hall, the Sydney Opera House. And those always go well because the conditions there are really set up for you to succeed. And you've done enough shows getting to that point. I was probably 15, 20 years in for all of the gigs that I mentioned. So yeah, when you have experience and all that, but that's when the conditions are right and you're in like these pristine venues, these iconic venues. But when you're just playing a college or you're playing a corporate gig or a casino, where there's so many more variables, and that's what people don't realize when they watch you do a Letterman set or a Jimmy Fallon or any of these Colbert. They're just watching that 5 minutes and assessing it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But really, when you watch anyone who is doing a late night set, that is the product of all of the gigs that we're talking about. That's the product of all those Elks clubs, all those firehouses, all those college and corporate gigs, gigs in kind of these B and C rooms in outposts all over the country, all over the world. So that's why I always celebrate anyone who gets that 5-minute set for late night, or anything for that matter. And the longer you go in comedy too, there is that camaraderie of like we celebrate one another because we know how hard it is to get to that point. And to give a specific example, I remember I did a gig for McDonald's. It was a corporate gig for McDonald's East Coast operators. And ironically enough, it was at Trump Casino in like probably 2000, 2001. And I was hired to do, I believe, 20 minutes. And I did like 10 and it was going well. Everything was fine. And they had hired me based off of my Comedy Central half hour. So that was the material they had seen and that they said, we want this guy for the gig. So I'm doing those jokes. And one of them was a Jesus jokes. Jesus has good abs. He should have a workout, like 3-day abs, cross training. And then all of a sudden I see a guy giving me the cut sign from the side of the stage. I was confused. I was like halfway through a set. It was going well. And the guy said, the top guy was offended by you talking about Jesus. So, that was just like one of those bizarre, and it took me like 6 months to get paid because I guess specifically because this, whatever he was, this higher up, this human resources guy, whatever he was offended by a Jesus joke. And I had to like fight for like 6 months to get paid from $1 billion McDonald's, but eventually I did.
That's insane. It's insane for two reasons. One, that comedy is like one of the only professions I feel like where if you don't like the job that's done, you feel like you don't have to pay that person anything. Where like if a plumber came over and they put some pipes in and they didn't do it exactly how you thought, like it still works, right? The water is still running, but it's not aesthetically pleasing. There's still this obligation to pay them. So to think that like, well, it wasn't exactly what I wanted, forget it. Like, it's crazy. The other thing that's insane is that people, like you said, you're hired off of a certain set of material, right? So they like, it's almost like if you don't, for these corporate shows, if you're not completely in that box, it could be an issue,
Yeah, it's like you hired me because I don't do what you guys do. If you want the funny guy at the office, ask him to come up and do 20 minutes.
right.
But I'm a professional comedian that you saw what I do. You saw my Comedy Central half hour and
Right.
you hired me specifically to do that material. So I did. And I guess that particular guy who was offended hadn't seen it or hadn't approved it or whatever the case was. but it is a very specific type of corporate dynamic where if one person doesn't like it, you could be in jeopardy of not getting paid.
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't feel too bad saying this because he knows, but I was working with Jimmy Schubert on a corporate show, and you know, he's very old school, sort of fire from the hip kind of guy.
Sure.
And they were upset when the show was over. They were upset because they thought he was a little too much for the crowd. And he said it really clearly. He said, if you hire Jimmy Schubert, you're going to get Jimmy Schubert. And it's like, you know, hey, there's a lot of material. There's a lot of material for you to judge who I am as a comedian. And there's a lot of other comedians out there, you know, but you picked me for this reason, you know.
Yeah. It really is baffling when they're doing the hiring. It's not like I just showed up and did a guerrilla comedy show. You
Right.
hired me and you know what I do.
Yeah, it's nuts. Ted, what do you think do you have a bomb in your past here that was so bad that, you know, it's kind of the one that maybe it breaks you. If you're a weaker comic, a weaker person, maybe it breaks you. But because it didn't, you survived and you got through it. Like, and maybe that's why you are where you are today. Do you have any of those sort of bombs where you were like, this might be it? This might be it for me for comedy?
You know, never one that I seriously thought that. I mean, if you're a comedian, you think that every week, if
Yeah.
not every month. And the bombs are almost those are really more fun to discuss with your fellow comedians too. Nobody cares if you killed, but if after a gig, you know, you call up a friend or you text a friend and you say, I just bombed, they're like, I want to hear and tell me the story. I want to hear every detail. Because again, the camaraderie of like, we've all been through that. So
Right.
the longer you've done it, there's really nothing that will surprise too many people. So, I mean, I remember one gig where I was at Stand Up New York, and I was just trying some stuff out. Like, it was after 9/11, and it was, I was doing some stuff because Major League Baseball took to playing God Bless America at the games. I had been to a couple of games, and like, so all of these kind of pomp and circumstance and heavy-handed kind of you know, patriotism wrapped up in all of that kind of stuff was, you know, I was thinking more and more about it, how the seventh inning typically at baseball games is for take me out to the ball game, and now they're playing God Bless America because of the terrorist attack. And, you know, I was kind of just mining that. It was a late night set, and I was talking about how not everybody who attends a baseball game believes in God. You're going to have atheists at a baseball game. Not everybody who attends the game is American. So, you know, I was just, it was like I was exploring these ideas, and the room just went nuts. There was a table in the back that just started yelling shit out, you know, and it was one of those things where I would say like a good 60% of the room was with me and understood what I was kind of, you know, it wasn't like a polished bit. I was exploring something, and also something that wasn't like, hey, dating is weird. It was, you know, something a little more nuanced, something with a little more meat on the bone, but also a smaller target to hit.
Right.
But yeah, the room went insane to the point that table, when I was getting off the stage, like they came to meet me at the bottom of the steps, and a woman like grabbed my shirt, and I had to like, you know, kind of shake her off. And luckily there's kind of a quick exit on the side of the stage at Stand Up New York. But I like, a couple of the security from the club took me out the side door. I hopped in a cab and I was out of there. So I was like, it was such a bizarre thing that moments earlier I was in the midst of like, is this going to be a fight as I leave the stage, to like, I'm in a cab on the way to my next set. And that, as much as anything, almost really embodies what it is to be a comedian. You go from this insane melee, just chaos that you're trying to get through just because of something that you're saying, some ideas you're exploring, where someone physically grabs you, to then I'm in a cab, complete silence. The driver has no idea what just happened. I'm going to my next show. Very bizarre.
That is such a beautifully accurate way to sum up comedy. And it goes like that. I mean, the peaks are really high really quickly, and the valleys are really low really quickly, and it just spikes up and down.
Yeah, and I remember too. I texted Marion Groden, who's a comedian friend of mine here in New York, and I texted her from the back of the cab. I'm like, I just almost had a fight at Stand Up New York. I got attacked by this woman who grabbed, and she called me immediately, and she's like, tell me about it. And of course, your comedian friends will always, talk you off the ledge. And of course, they'll take some shots at you too and make fun of you, which is all part of it and fun. But, ultimately, they'll tell you, who cares? Like, that crowd sucked. Like, just move on to the next. So it's always reassuring to share those kinds of things with other comedians.
Yeah. Do you think, I think that's something that a lot of comics do. As far as coping with a bomb, is that sort of the go-to coping mechanism for you, is to talk with another comedian? Or do you have something that you like to do when a bad show happens?
Well, it really depends on what caused things to go off the rails. If it was my fault, then I kind of go inward and think about like, oh, I wasn't prepared, or I didn't handle a certain interaction the right way. There's that kind of thing. As opposed to if I'm kind of secure in the fact that I did the right thing, and like in that night, I was just trying stuff out, and it was stuff that I had prepared to a certain extent, but I was exploring. So if I'm kind of standing in my conviction that this is what I do, then I have no problem with a bomb. So some of those bombs are almost amusing, because it's like, you kind of lean into it. You're like, all right, if we're going to bomb, it's going to be on my terms. And then you just, you figure it out. And sometimes you can even turn them around. But yeah, like the longer you go, like you don't want to turn it around in a sense of like waving the white flag or giving in to a crowd that sucks, or you want it to be like in your power, that like, I'm steering this ship and it's going to go exactly where I want it to go. If I want it to go into the river, and hit the iceberg or whatever, then that's where we're going to go.
Right.
So if it's by my design, and if I, kind of have ownership of it, then I'm fine with the bomb. But if it's through something of my own fault that after I reassess it, then I feel bad. But either way, I usually will talk to someone about it.
It's interesting. A lot of, that's probably the most popular one, and the second most popular one I've heard from people, and for me also, is fast food. It is, especially if you are out of town, right? If you're in a middle of nowhere place, you have a bad set, it's the amount of comics that I know, and even myself, that will look for like a McDonald's, a Wendy's. We can't mainline it fast enough to like try to comfort ourselves,
Yeah, you go for the worst thing on the menu and you supersize it. Yeah, definitely, for sure. If you can do both of those things, like get some huge amount of garbage food and then call a comedian friend, that's the perfect mix.
Yeah, right. Food is such an interesting thing in comedy, I feel like, because it can be a comfort, it can be like a prize. Like, I don't know about you, but like if you're playing a club, that, even if it's not that good of a meal, the free meal that you get from the comedy club, you're like, well, this is why I got into this business. Like, it could be a chicken salad, and you're like, this is pretty great.
Yeah, and like you said, all of that is colored by how the set goes, right? Like if you get off stage and that chicken salad is waiting for you and the crowd sucked, it looks like a comedy club chicken salad, like just a shitty like iceberg lettuce thing. But if you killed, that salad, it's like, all right, let's dig in, man. Like I earned it, you know?
Do you feel like, not to make this too food centric, but for me, if I have a really good set, like come off, maybe you're sweating a little bit, you know, because you're up there working. I come off and I'm like, I'm starved. And it's like, I didn't really do anything. Like I didn't do manual labor, but I have this feeling of like, I need to refill, you
Oh
know?
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the degree of concentration that stand-up comedy takes is very high, especially if you're trying to do something that matters to you. If you're just mailing it in, maybe you're not really as focused or locked in. But if you're really trying to engage and you're trying to be present, performing is draining and requires your attention, you know, even more so than possibly manual labor that, you know, if you're exerting yourself, but you know, you're just doing the same motion over and over again. That's a different kind of exhaustion than like 2 shows or sometimes 3 shows headlining on the road. You know, by the end of that night, 3 show Saturday night, sometimes 4 when I first started, you're just like, you know, your body has been through it, man, because you're locked in and you're concentrating and you're present. And, you know, as a comic, you're always like telling the joke, but also thinking the next joke ahead or the next group of jokes ahead. So, you know, it is draining. There's a lot of concentration that constantly goes into it.
Yeah, that's a good point about those back-to-back shows. You know, um, I remember like I started in Pittsburgh and before I moved to New York. And you know, the local club, they give you the off night and they said, all right, you're gonna try to, it's free tickets. All your cousins are gonna come out. It's a big deal. And it
Yeah.
was like the first time I ever really did a long set in a club, like 45 minutes. And I remember coming off stage thinking like, how do people do this twice in one night? You know? And
Right.
at what point do you think, do you have a point that you could recall where you realized like, okay, I now know how to come off from the early show, sort of refocus and get ready for the late show and not feel completely gassed? Did it take you a while to get there?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's almost like going to the gym and getting your reps in and building up a certain amount of stamina. It's very much like that. You know, I remember not so much an early show, late show thing, you know, on the road, like I think you're speaking about. More so, I remember in New York City, there was a night that I did 8 sets in a night. So the first one was maybe 7:30. The last one was probably 1 or 1:30 in the morning, and they were all spaced out so that, you know, maybe it was you know, the way it was mapped out, it was 3 at one club, 3 at another club, and 2 at a third club. But they were all kind of placed so that it was like I do my 15 minutes, hop in a cab, go to the other club, do 15, then go back or go to that third club. So it was all kind of the precision of the scheduling will all just lined up so that I had 8 in one night. So yeah, I remember that feeling like, you know, you go through the whole gamut of like the adrenaline of great crowds and just the rush of like, okay, that one's over, on to the next, into a cab. You know, your mind is, you're thinking of tags because you're so like in it and you've done like 4 sets in a row, 5 sets in a row. And then you start to forget by the 7th or 8th, you forget like, did I already tell this joke? So yeah, that was kind of a watershed night where I remember like, this is kind of special, doing 8 sets in a night and just the stamina that takes.
That's the dream, you know, and
Yep.
that's the appeal of New York when young comics, myself, you know, when we move there, that is the thing that you see on the documentaries, the shows and stuff, and you're like, that is what it means to be a comic, to just go from one place to another like a hired gun. You know?
Yeah, no, it is a great thing, and I think if you can do it, it's well worth it. And there's times of your career where those things are goals and they matter. But now, you know, at age 51, I can kind of get my work done in 2 or 3 sets. I don't need to do 8. And also, I'm married with a kid now, so you know, there's always different phases of life, different phases of your career. Your priorities shift. You can get work done in different ways than you used to. So yeah, there is a time for that maniacal focus and like the insatiable need to get on stage. But then the older you get and the more you've done it, you don't need that as much. You can get your work done in shorter increments. And if I did 8 sets now, I'd probably just collapse after, 5. I'd be like, all right, I'm out. Who wants to do my last 3?
Right, right. Before we wrap up, let me ask you to go back to the stand-up New York night where ladies there. I think if people are not familiar with comedy, they don't see it a lot, or they're not in the business of it, they might think that, everyone's worried about getting heckled. I feel like the question is, do you get heckled a lot? What's it, is it, we're going to heckle you, or this person's going to heckle, and
Right.
is that, first of all, is that the most volatile crowd you had to deal with? So where someone was coming up and grabbing you, or was that not too bad?
Yeah, that might have been the most volatile because they got up out of their seats. It was probably, I think it was 2 people from that table. It looked like a husband and a wife. And the wife, strangely enough, was the one who was prepared to fight me. So yeah, they got up. They, Stand Up New York's a small club. It probably seats 120 people. So they didn't have far to go. And that's another thing about stand up too, that people may or may not realize is like, you have to exit. There's not like a backstage. You have to exit through the crowd.
Right.
So in the event that things don't go well, you are, right into the thick of the people who may want to assault you in this case. So she grabbed me and I kind of just shook free and said, like, get your hands off me kind of. And the husband luckily was more, I think, just watching her than like also looking to fight me. He was more like, all right, it seemed like maybe this happens from time to time. So
Right.
he was ready to play his role. So yeah, luckily, like I said, the security then met me at the side door, took me out. So that was definitely up there as far as I also, to be honest, I also kind of felt like the security didn't do their job. And I've had this happen on a couple of occasions. I remember also when Trump first got elected, I remember there was this shift where I was doing some Trump related material. And I try not to do like low hanging fruit, like, Trump is dumb or whatever. I try to have stuff that maybe has a point or is a little bit more nuanced in some way. Because I figure like everyone's doing, especially in the early going, everyone's doing Trump jokes. So I was out on Long Island, and those can be almost like a firehouse, like wherever you are. And I did some Trump material, and again, another table started yelling and shouting and interrupting like my next 5 minutes, more or less. And I remember saying to the security, like, at what point, like, what does someone have to do to get thrown out of here, like, or to even get talked to, like, because they have like these guys in suits in the back of the room, and it's like, are you guys just here, like, is a photographer coming, are we taking pictures after the like, why are you guys dressed up, to just sit in the room? So yeah, I've had some issues with security sometimes where they're like, oh, I thought you were going to give me a signal. I was like, the signal is when they're disrupting the show for 5 minutes, you
Yeah.
should step in.
Yeah, that is a lonely feeling, to be on stage and realize that the club does not have your back. It's like, man, I am totally by myself up here.
Yeah, yeah. And you're like, okay, I've got another, 30 minutes left. And I know I've lost, that table for sure, then they just go into shutdown mode, and they're like, they could be at a restaurant at that point. They're just eating, making noise, occasionally yelling something out. And the guy after the show, the guy will be like, it was like a party of 20. I couldn't really kick him out. I was like, well, you could have, but you chose not to.
Yeah,
So, those are the kind of things you have to navigate as a comedian. And, a Friday night, a Saturday night, it could be the late show. People could be drunk. You have to figure it out. You have to maybe just get a little louder. You have to like power through, whatever it is, you have to kind of lock in. And, it feels like forever, but you have to get through those next 30, 40 minutes, whatever it is.
Yeah, those are the times when you realize when they go, well, it was a big party, or they made a big reservation, and like, oh, I'm performing in an Applebee's. That's what this is. This is a restaurant that has tried to do stand-up comedy.
Yeah, and I remember at one time, actually, I had a gig where there was the same kind of thing, a loud table. It's funny how you, as a comedian, you can always remember the placement. They were to my right, this loud, disruptive table. And same kind of thing, disruptive throughout the show. I tried to jokingly address it a few times, tried to kind of go back and forth with them, but it was just like, after a while, it was a disaster. So at the end, like, I go up to the owner, I'm like, you know what, how come nobody went up to that table ever throughout my 45-minute set? And he's like, oh, that guy just got out of jail, and I knew him from my teenage years, and they were celebrating that he got out. I was like, well, you could have told me that your friend was celebrating getting out of jail so that I knew what the hell was going on, so yeah, just like, that was one of the more bizarre things. He's like, yeah, sorry, he just got out of jail. So it was a get out of jail celebration.
The old get out of jail, go to a comedy show routine.
Right. The most natural progression.
Oh, to taste free air again in a strip mall. It's
yeah. My freedom has been constrained for the past 3 years. I'm gonna go fuck with a comedian.
Oh my God. Ted, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. This was an absolute pleasure to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Collin.
Of course, you have, when this comes out, you have a special out.
I do.
Tell people about the special.
My new special, Cut Up, is available for free on YouTube. And this is a special that I was actually like planning to shoot at a theater, but then the pandemic hit. So I kind of culled together footage from the Comedy Cellar, the Village Underground, and Helium out in Portland. So it's put together, hence the name. I cut it together from 3 different clubs, and it's my new special, and it's an hour, and I love it, and it's a little different because of the fact that it is like 3 different clubs. It's not like one venue, so it was put together, and it's now available on YouTube.
That's awesome, man. That is I love, as crazy as this pandemic has been, obviously it's horrible, but I love the new lens that comedians are able to find, in the way that comedians can adapt is so beautiful, in times like these.
If nothing else, that's what we know how to do, for sure.
Oh yeah, we're quick on our feet.
Get it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Take care.
See ya.